Well, we had a meeting on the site, and Robeson was introduced to the workers, and he spoke about his relationship with the workers in other countries because he was a prominent figure in the international working class movement.
Let us know. We will try to do better here we don't think woke is a bad word, but we prefer no annoying interruptions to the service, so please turn off your phones, and I need to do that myself, and any other devices you may have. If you're concerned about the spreading of viruses by singing, we urge you to sit at the back and or wear a mask available at the doors. This service is being streamed, so when you come up here to speak, if you come up here at all, please know that you will be broadcast on YouTube, which will be out there forever. So, Jake, we have 157 song, okay? So the time, let's spend our time together with 157 in the gray hymnal that's from on your chairs. And the opening song is Step by Step. Thank you. So please stand as you're willing and able. Thank you. Someone's willing to. To start our service this morning with our chalice lighting is Bob McDaneld.
Good morning. This morning I light the chalice for all the people who came before us and helped create the positive parts of the world we have today. I think it's important to understand that when we look at our somewhat difficult history, that there is at least as much positive in the history as there is negative. And part of that positive history we'll talk about today. We'll also talk about how each step built on another step. And so hopefully we'll get at some point to where we need to go.
Thank you, Bob. Announcements, joys, and concerns. I have two announcements to get this started off with. First off, Suzanne and Richard Emilios are celebrating their on March 17th, their 10th anniversary. I see Susanna here this morning. And as you all know, we're having a second Sunday lunch today. Isn't that wonderful? And I so look forward to that. Please honor the kids and elderly going through the line first. Thank you. Are there other announcements, joys, or concerns?
I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. Cynthia Maxwell, I always forget to say that. She, her, hers. Looking forward to awesome announcements and articles for the April newsletter. Please help publicize everything that makes our community beloved and send them to Susanna Emilio, Skylar Starr, Aaron Fornstein, or me. Recognize that those near and dear to you may be unwilling to toot their own horn, so encourage them to share if they're willing. If at all possible, get submissions in by March 23rd. Snap a photo or two from Dinners for 8 of food, fellowship, or fun. I know we're looking forward to Saturday, whether we're first-timers like me or old hands. Take a photo or two of today's meal. Am I too loud? No, you're too slow. Oh, okay. Take a photo or two of today's meal and conversations as well and send them to me. Lastly, don't forget that next week's program, featuring Kansas Poet Laureate Tracy Brimhall, is also a food drive. We'll have the chuck wagon available for donations as well as the larger cart if needed.
Wednesday, March the 22nd, 6 o'clock p.m., Dr. Joy DeGrue, author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, is going to give a talk at the Washburn Student Union.
The UUFT men's group has decided to open its roles again. We currently have about 12 members, most of us older, but we want to go ahead and invite younger people into the group and also trans people as far as into the group. So we meet Monday evenings at 6:30 to 8 o'clock. If the men that are in the men's group that are here today, if they would stand up, you can talk to any of these guys as far as with about questions about the men's group, and if you're interested, we really encourage you to consider it. So thank you. No, it's every other week. I'm sorry.
What is it, first and third?
It's every 2 weeks. Every other week.
Second, fourth?
If we did it last week, we're gonna do it next week. That's how we did it.
My name's Kinsey Anderson, and I have a joy to share. For the last several months, I've been interviewing for various promotions, and this last one stuck. So I just got a new job that I will start the beginning of April, and I'm very excited about it.
Hi, I'm Bailey, and I turned 21 on the 21st of March.
Hi, I'm Adam. Ooh. My aunt, Julie, has been battling with a specific type of cancer. And she just finished her chemotherapy
So just hoping for a speedy recovery from that and hoping that it sticks.
Last but certainly not least, I'm David Schaeffer, and I'm your pledge chair this year. And just a reminder that you will be canvassed sometime in the next, 30, 40 days. We almost have a budget in place. We're working on it. The Finance Committee is creating a interesting budget that we hope everyone will agree with, and you will be contacted and canvassed individually, as many as people by me, but I will require some help, and I'm going to get some help. So expect to hear from me. Thank you. If you have any questions, come up to me after the service.
I'm Carolyn Peck, and I just wanted to let people know that Walt has COVID, Walt Racker. Mild symptoms, but they're quarantining at home, and probably, I don't know, they might like a phone call or a text or something like that.
Thank you all. And now we're going to hear a story for all ages, Blowing in the Wind, read by Cynthia Maxwell.
Oh, yeah, I'm gonna leave the chalice. Great. Glad you remembered and reminded me. Let's see if I can get this. I did it right when I practiced. Okay. So, I first heard these lyrics when I was real little, younger than you, over 50 years ago. And I heard them by Peter, Paul, and Mary because my mother did not care for Nobel laureate. And I just threw that away. So, now I'm loud. Oh, it worked so well in practice. Aaron makes it look so easy. Okay, so these lyrics remind me of that the fight for social justice is never ending, and to have faith even when we feel like our efforts are blowing in the wind. Blowing in the Wind, lyrics by Bob Dylan, illustrations by John J. Muth. How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? How many seas must the white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? And how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Yes, and how many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? Yes, and how many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? Yes, and how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Yes, and how many times must a man look up before he can see the sky? And how many ears must one man have before he can hear people cry? Yes, and how many deaths will it take till he knows that too many people have died? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Okay, want to get the chalice.
Thank you, Cynthia. Let's sing the children out with This Little Light of Mine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. And we're going to have an offering this morning, I believe. We have collection baskets available. Kind of on your own this morning as far as music. So from you I receive. One we all know. I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live. From you I receive, to you I give, together we share, and from this we live.
Good morning. I'm Bob McDaneld. One of the interesting things about doing programs is inevitably something happens that you don't want to happen. And so we will make do. Janine, fortunately, did tons of preparation, and most of it's documented, so we will do whatever we can. Earlier this year, Richie and I were watching a PBS special, watching the PBS News when a special came on, and it was Buffy St. Marie doing a 1-hour special on her music over a 50-year period. And she's a Canadian folk singer who has been writing and performing folk music for a long time. Many of her songs are anti-war, others talk about the problems of Indigenous peoples. I have listened to folk music most of my life and believe it can be an effective means for challenging the decisions governments make, and also challenge governments sometimes to do the right thing, like ensuring basic civil rights for all. Mulling over the program later that night, I realized that the history of protest music in the United States could be a good topic for here at UUFT. My favorite singer has always been Joan Baez, and her rendition of I Dreamed I Saw Joe Hill Last Night, a labor rights song from about 1900, made an impact. I decided to look at protest music, beginning with gospel music at the time of slavery, and moving forward almost 200 years to the music supporting LGBTQ rights. I'm grateful that Ray is sitting in the back row. I told him if I veered too far from his knowledge of American history to just give me a break, because this is, I sort of picked and chose what I wanted to talk about. On July 4th, 1776, the Declaration of Independence was announced, and 13 colonies decided to sever their connection with Great Britain. Although these colonies all hugged the Atlantic coastline, from New Hampshire to Georgia, they had 3 things in common. First, in all of those colonies, slavery was legal, every single one. Second, only white male landowners could vote. You got that? Not enough to be white, you had to be male, you had to own land. If you met those 3 criteria, you could vote. And third, these colonial governments had, during their entire duration, seized the property of indigenous populations to establish and enlarge their territory. So that is what our history is. That is how we got to where we are today. All of these things were illegal. The only thing that was illegal was challenging King George III. Lana? Yankee Doodle is an example of a song that backfired. Written to tease and humiliate the colonists, it was turned into a "How do you like them doodles?" rallying song. The Revolutionary War was successful, and the colonies moved towards self-governance. White migration to the West pushed the indigenous peoples off their traditional lands, out of their homes, and then off to reservations, which were later made smaller and less important one by one. Virtually every treaty we ever made with Native American nations was broken. There may be one or two exceptions, but they aren't many. The stage was set for to assure continuation of the problems that we still have today. By 1850, it was becoming clear that there was a fault line across the United States over the issue of slavery. When the southern states decided that war was inevitable and took preemptive action to sever their ties to the northern states, every part of American life was called into question. Abolitionists, both white and black, formed to not only fight the laws, but to bring slaves north to freedom. Songs helped spread the word and possibly, this is mixed historically, but possibly provide directions how to go north to Canada. When the Civil War ended in 1865, and it ended with a Union victory, and I want to put that victory in quotes, power was being realigned by the Industrial Revolution, and white male property owners were forced to share power with other white males, in part because of access to capital. So we had a different view of which white males were in charge, but it was still white males. Industrialization and immigration were dramatically changing the population, both by creating new opportunities and attempting to enforce old barriers. The pro-labor movement began in earnest in the years after the Civil War and until the involvement of the United States in the First World War in 1917. And if you want to think about it, that's really not long a period, okay? It's less than 50 years from the one thing to the other. And since I can readily remember 50 years ago, don't think of it as being a long time then. As newly freed slaves moved to the north, seeking jobs and new opportunities, inequities in the labor market became more obvious. State and federal laws, many of them based on English common law, made it illegal for workers to form unions. It was illegal to form a union and protest working conditions. Got that? Against the law. Wealthy white males still controlled every aspect of the economy, with a special focus in terms of the economy on railroads and the steel industry, which of course were working hand in hand. Former slaves were competing with white immigrants for jobs, child labor was common, and women were left, once again, at the bottom of the labor totem pole. As workers began the slow process of organizing workforces into unions, a slow and bloody transfer of power began. Labor advocates, like Joe Hill, began writing and singing protest songs to reinforce the need for change. Many in the labor movement paid a heavy price for their activism. One of those people was Joe Hill, who was murdered by Utah on trumped-up charges. Part of that change was a push by educated white women to gain access to power, beginning with the right to vote. Now seen as the first wave of feminism, the women's suffrage movement was attempting to get women the right to vote at the same time the labor movement was attempting to establish unions. Both causes got significant pushback from the white male power structure. Women finally got the right to vote when the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920. You might be interested in knowing that every 2 or 3 minutes I'm jumping over the music that was going to be done by Janine. So if that's my hesitation, it's only because there's a part of the program that I saw as essential that is not here this morning. When the Supreme Court prohibited segregated schools in 1954, it ordered that states move forward with all deliberate speed to eliminate racial discrimination. Most states, including all southern states, made no changes in either laws or practice except to adopt new laws to establish different requirements for schools and trying to figure out how they could avoid complying with the change. Kansas, which was one of the defendants in the state, began to integrate its grade schools, mostly by closing all black schools and laying off black faculty and staff members. That's, for example, is exactly what happened in Topeka 60 years ago. We were among a majority of states, a majority of cities that didn't think that blacks should attend schools with whites. And incidentally, even though the high schools and the junior highs were presumably open to all, there was significant prejudice in those schools. Just as one example, if you went to Topeka High School, you could not, if you were black, do any sports. You didn't have access to the gym. You didn't have access to the swimming pool. And that was us, and that was then. In the South, discrimination was more obvious, with Rosa Parks challenging orders to sit in the back of us, and blacks began pushing against a multitude of discriminatory acts. Restaurants and restrooms were segregated, and the right to vote was routinely denied. The poll tax, for example, was still there. Tests on reading and writing were given only to black people. As blacks with some white allies began sit-ins in restaurants and marches in the street, the American people began to understand what the legacy of slavery was, or that slavery was still alive, and the legacy of slavery was still alive and well across the country. Finally, for the first time in 1964, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act, and some forms of discrimination were eliminated or prohibited. This would not have happened if blacks and some white allies had not taken to the streets. Martin Luther King and many other civil rights leaders pushed for changes, and people, including some white liberals, became activists. And now pretend you're listening to We Shall Not Be Moved. Music, including variations of early spirituals and folk songs, were used to unify people and attract public attention. Civil rights were still under attack, and people needed to be fully engaged. Music helped further that engagement. At the same time black people were fighting for civil rights, the American government was supporting French colonial power in Southeast Asia. Under the guise of protecting the world from communism, we began sending troops, first to Vietnam and then over the entire region. Where we could not send troops, we bombed defenseless populations. Fortunately, and I say fortunately because one small change made a difference, an alert photographer took pity on a naked 9-year-old girl who had been injured by napalm. When that picture hit the American public and we realized that it was a war with no clear beginning and no foreseeable end, protests also began in earnest. Music, once again, was a key part of those protests. And now we have I Won't Keep Quiet, No, No, I Won't Keep Quiet, because people recognized that they could no longer keep quiet. Continuing down history's path, the American Indian Movement, or AIM, began in July 1968 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to address systemic racism in the Twin Cities. We're talking about Minneapolis, St. Paul here, folks. They asked that systemic issues of poverty, discrimination, and police brutality against Native Americans in the Twin Cities be ceased, but they quickly expanded to all the area reservations and then throughout the nation, because the problems dealt with or attempted dealt with by Native Americans were real, okay? And if there could be an argument as to whether blacks or Native Americans were at the bottom of the totem pole. But either one was awfully close. LGBTQ. The LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and queer movement has made slow but steady progress since awareness of gay rights became very public after police raided a gay bar, the Stonewall Inn, and following riots in New York City in 1968. notice I said slow but steady, okay? Slow means very slow, and steady means... But this was a movement that essentially learned quite a bit from the recognition that blacks had rights, the recognition that women could vote, and people began realizing that if they too push their issues, they too could gain their basic rights. Public acceptance of gay rights became more common, and cities like New York and San Francisco became havens for gay men. This slowly led to a much greater acceptance of sexual orientation and gender identification. This has been a very brief glimpse of about 200 years of American history. Much has been left out because of time constraints. Much has been left out because the question is, I wanted enough in here that people would recognize that that may have been a part of the history class they took 40, 50, 20 years ago. We are slowly improving in how we see history. We are still reluctant for any kind of history that identifies ourselves as bad people. The whole woke movement, which essentially says if it was difficult, we ought to shut up about it, is right now raging across the land with every Republican politician claiming that they want to assure that the truth is not heard. And that presents a problem for those of us who still believe that the truth needs to be heard. Our job is to stand in opposition to these attempted changes. As we have discovered, rights, think about abortion, can be taken away by a Supreme Court, and 50 years of history and women's access to abortion disappeared overnight. We are losing our rights in every conservative state. That, by the way, includes Kansas. If you look at what the Kansas legislature is doing right now, in terms of gender issues, in terms of education, in terms of parental rights to decide what schooling their kids are going to get, we are in exactly the same position as most southern states. And that's the people that may live down the block for us or may live somewhere we know, and they're the people who we elected to do, I hope, a very different job than we are actually doing. The time for action is now.
Thank you, Bob. So it's time for a congregational dialogue. I do that. Anyone would like to have some feedback?
My name is Lana Balka. The source of my information is Jack Alexander, who used to be, many years ago, the water commissioner. While there were black and white students in middle school and high school, they did have all separate activities. He was on the black basketball team. They had the black band and they had the black jazz band. They went to school together, but they had these activities that were totally separate, and the black, basketball team played the black basketball team in Kansas City or Junction City or wherever. They had another black basketball team.
I'm Dennis Bosley. Ken Curl, class of 1947, Topeka High, referred to the black basketball team and sports teams as the Topeka Ramblers. Yeah. I'd also like to make another comment. I'm in a book club. We're reading Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, and at the beginning of the book, she quotes James Baldwin, who says, "The reason nobody believes us is because we're telling the truth."
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. So shall overcome someday. That's that's one of my favorite songs when it comes to protest songs. And I think the someday is still coming. There is so much injustice in the world, and I see it every day. I mean, there's a lot of talk on the internet of bringing back Jim Crow laws in some states here in the U.S., and that's just completely ridiculous in my opinion. We've come so far as a nation, but we still have so much further to go, and it seems like the people in power right now just want to take us backwards. They want to take us back to the Jim Crow era. They want to take us back to when women didn't have the rights that they did, when the LGBT community was actively, much more actively rather, discriminated against. And that's why I enjoy coming here so much, is because I get to see people who are actively pushing back against the things that are happening right now, but there's still such a long way that we all need to go.
I'm going to add a little piece of positivity here, because if anyone else is like me, sometimes I feel so overwhelmed by this conversation and hopeless. But I'm going to counter that we are not as bad as some of the southern states, because I lived in Louisiana for 7 years before moving here, and I'm telling you, Kansas is a hell of a lot better. I think for me, one of the pieces that I really firmly believe that is because we voted in Kansas to save abortion rights. And that would not have happened in some of the southern states. So I think we have to recognize the difference between what our population believes and holds dear versus those in power, right? And so I'm hanging on to hope, because our population has spoken and demonstrated what we hold dear. And we have to somehow elevate that to the people in power.
Amen. Yes.
For those of us who grew up in the 50s and 60s, we all remember things like Kent State. I went to East High in Wichita, and we had sophomore corner and junior corner and senior corner. And then there was the other corner that we didn't talk about. But I love her idea of a positivity, because you all know Cynthia and Neve. And I am so proud that we have pictures of Neve with us at the Women's March and protests in Wichita and here. We're raising our girl right.
Hi. I feel very personally about this issue. I mean, it affects me, it affects my spouse and partners and everything in between. I have multiple friends that are also a part of the LGBT community, and it is so hard to have to not only deal with it myself, but see people that I care about have to suffer with it. And I don't feel sad about it like a lot of people do. They feel helpless and hopeless. I feel angry. I feel this inner rage of why does this even have to be a thing? Like, I don't know if anyone knows about the trans bill that's going in Kansas right now, but it would not allow Blair, one of my partners and someone who this congregation absolutely adores, he would not be allowed to take his testosterone anymore. At all. And his doctors, if they tried to let him have it, could be criminalized and sent to prison for it. Tell me that is not the most enraging thing that you have ever heard. That someone, because it's so much easier when you just hear about it of like, wow, that really sucks. That's really hard for those other people that are suffering through that. But when you know someone who is going to be affected by that and that is going to break their soul, tell me that is not the most rage-inducing thing. And so while people have made big strides, and I'm glad that things are slowly getting better, it is not time to take a back seat yet. You still have to be just as angry and just as defiant as you were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And that sucks that we can't just be able to, rest and be able to be okay with it. But that's the reality. And so I love the positive things that we've talked about, but remember that while there are so many positives, we need to continue to fight to make sure that there still can be positives and that it's not all erased. So that is my small rant. I'm sorry about that.
We have a closing song, I believe. Jake, do we have a closing song? The circle song. And while Jake's getting that together, I'll read you what Janine wrote about that. It's by Alexa Dawson, a Potawatomi singer and songwriter. Born on the Citizen Potawatomi Nation in 1979, Alexa moved to Kansas in 2006. I recognize this area was home to the Kansa tribe at the time the white man arrived. There were many tribal changes due to native issues and to the press of white Western migration. I acknowledge the Potawatomi who sold the land on which my house stands.
So the song that she was going to sing, the song.
She was going to sing the song.
We have another video after, but she was going to sing the song.
Okay, well, I won't.
You sure you don't want to sing it?
No, I don't want to sing it.
Do you want to read the words to the lyrics that are there?
Yeah, where are they? There are no lyrics here.
You belong in the circle, you belong, you belong. You belong in the circle, you belong, you belong. Not above, not below. In the circle you belong. You were born in the circle. All of life is a circle. There is love. We belong, we belong. There is peace in the circle. We belong, we belong.
Thank you, Jake. And I'd like to invite you to give some gratitude to Jake for all that he does for us. Thank you, Jake. And we're going to stop our streaming now because we don't have copyright protection for the next, the postlude. And that is A Change Is Going to Come by Sam Cooke.